Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. We have Kitty Green, the director of The Assistant, here to answer some questions.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. So, to begin with, Kitty, why did you want to make this kind of a film, this story?
I started work on a project that was about consent on college campuses and power structures there. And I was going around colleges and interviewing students and chatting to them about that. And that when I was at one of the colleges, my phone kind of lit up and I realized that Weinstein story had broke, and I knew a few people that worked at the Weinstein company, so I started chatting to them. Started chatting to people that worked at similar companies with bosses that had a similar, were similar in nature, I guess. And then I just expanded it out and kept chatting to people and slowly kind of put together a picture that was sort of focusing more on women and their roles with basically why there aren't more women in the film industry, and looking at kind of these just... I guess I was more interested in gender imbalances than I was in the predators necessarily, but I still wanted to look at something that explored the misconduct, and so that became the focus.
Can you talk a little more about the research process for this? I've heard from a lot of people who've worked in the industry that it's very, very accurate to their experience, like down to some of the day-to-day details. So how does that work for creating a film like this?
We had... I don't know, I guess I was chatting to a lot of people that had worked at different companies, Weinstein and Miramax, and then other production companies that are still in existence here in New York, so I'm not so comfortable chatting about them, but there was very similar kind of stories coming out of all those companies. So I guess the tasks that she performs, I kind of would hear again and again and again from different assistants at different places. I spoke to people at studios and agencies, and then people in tech and finance, and they all had similar stories. So then I started kind of structuring the film around that day.
So to say they have similar stories is to say there's like patterns that you see in the stories. Is that right? Can you talk a little bit about what those are?
Yeah, I mean, I was chatting to a lot of young women and a lot of them a few of them had left the industry because they felt like they couldn't see a path for them or a way for them to be promoted. They saw the men being promoted before they did. I was very interested in like gendered division of labor. So say the fact that the women have to get the lunches or look after the children, whereas the boys get to sit in on the bigger meetings and things like that. So that became a focus, and
So obviously, this is a film that's sort of in a contained set for the most part, and you're casting someone who has to have a set of qualities, right? We're looking at her the whole time. There has to be a lot of things about her that work. So how'd you end up with Julia?
I had seen Julia in The Americans, I think, and thought she was amazing to look at, and I needed someone who was... I kept saying infinitely watchable because she's not speaking much. She's just doing kind of banal tasks. So we needed someone with a striking look. And so we met her for coffee, and she understood the script and got it immediately, and so it worked. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, to go back to the script, how did the script kind of develop as you were working through iterations of the story? Because I'm sure, you're thinking about it. You're kind of trying to come up with how this story is best told, and it's a unique way of telling that story.
I mean, I was looking at time and being kind of I wanted to equally weight like each of the tasks of the day, no matter how sensational they appeared. So the idea that something like getting the coffee had as much weight as something like picking up an earring off the couch or whatever. So all of that was sort of, I put together like all these tasks and then kind of ordered them out and kind of figured it out that way. It wasn't a very long process. It was like 2 months of writing and like 7 months of research. But once you had all of the kind of the idea of how it would go, it just sort of slotted in pretty easily.
Yeah, and you've got all these secondary characters populating this world who you have to be able to kind of invent and also have them stand in for types of people, right? So where were they coming from for you?
Oh, I mean, a lot of discussions with women about their colleagues, and I felt like I gave the boys a little too hard a go in the first draft, and then I had brought in and changed it because people were kind of aware that I didn't want to make it so like men bad, women good. So I added a few more female characters in who had a few of the more sinister lines. But I was just sort of, I don't know, I was kind of looking at power dynamics and all of that, who has it, how it can be abused, etc.
Yeah, so much of what was striking for me watching this was I think even if you haven't worked in the industry, you're like, you remember what it was like to kind of work in a low-level job where you were scared of your boss, and also where people said things about other people and you didn't really know what was happening, which is sort of the second part of this, right? Which is the feeling that we're watching someone try to figure out whether she's going to live in that environment, as a lot of those people have, and kind of go along with it, or whether she's going to live in a different way, right? And so a lot of this is about it's like a horror film where the villain is the system, right? And I know the systems were kind of important for you thinking through this.
Yeah, I mean, but that started from just reading the Me Too coverage and it being very focused on the men and the bad men, and me as a filmmaker wanting to focus it on broader kind of systems of power that are kind of structured against women inherently. So that, but also finding like that word system sounds very broad and vague, and finding kind of concrete examples of how to demonstrate what that is. And over the course of a day, we could, like, death by 1,000 cuts is kind of how we were describing it, like all these tiny little moments that can strip somebody of their self-worth and self-confidence. And
since we're at the Angelika, I guess we can talk about what I want to say, which is, can you talk about influences on this film, filmmaking style, the way you've kind of thought about how you were going to approach it as a filmmaker and as a visual piece?
the biggest influence is there's a Belgian, I think it's a Belgian film called Jean Dielman by Chantal Ackerman, which is about a woman's domestic duties and her going about her day over like a 24-hour, but it's 48 hours because it's 2 consecutive nights. But she does kind of go task by task, and kind of you follow her in real time, and I wanted to kind of replicate some of that. And then also, I mean, we were kind of pulling references, everything from like Fincher, because Zodiac and things that are shot in offices that still have mood and tension in them, became kind of references. And then also, I mean, I don't know, we were careful not to be. I wanted to be authentic and almost like documentary-like in its sort of observational style. So I always said to the cinematographer that we weren't allowed to be too tricky or too cool. Like, we wanted it to be very spare, minimal, and kind of quiet in the way we went about our business. So it wasn't like showing off our skills. Instead, it was her story and she was the focus. Don't wink is like what I think the way we refer to it, like, not like we're so cool, like look at us kind of thing, like none of that. It was very stripped back and minimal.
Did you always have the idea to keep the quote unquote Weinstein character in the background? Was that always part of the plan?
Yeah, he wasn't in the script at all originally, and then what we did was I wanted to shoot the phone calls in wide shots, but Julia's face is so beautiful and intriguing that I really needed to shoot them in close. So it ended up being weird that there wasn't any sound coming out of the other end of the phone. So we ended up recording those phone calls in post-production and kind of playing with an actor who's incredible, and he was like just improvising and throwing lines in, and we kind of got what we needed out of him. But it was about this idea of, we know what happens in that office, we know what happens behind that closed door, we've read enough about that. So the idea is we can look at the other side of it and the machinery around it, as opposed to watching that play out again and again. That was kind of the goal.
Yeah, I can imagine there are some challenges to shooting that way, though, right?
Yeah,
to keeping that guy in the background.
Yeah, a little, but if your focus is Julia's character, she doesn't interact with him that much anyway, so it just became about just her day, and so he's kind of irrelevant if you're kind of really interested in her, which is kind of the way my mind was set, even if maybe audiences are trying to find him. But I think we just kept squarely in her corner the whole time, and that made it easy.
Yeah, it sort of feels like he's a black hole in the film. Like, the energy follows him around and is sucked up by him. Yeah. Do you think that anything about your research process or the process of making the film something changed or shifted in the way you were thinking about these kinds of stories that were emerging?
Not really. I think the biggest thing was like just how shocking and devastating it was, and to hear it again and again and again, and how big like, I kind of knew what I wanted to say, and it came from my own frustrations as a female filmmaker and what I'd seen, but hearing just more people's stories and just how kind of rattled they were, and how much they felt like I don't know, so dehumanizing the system is, in a way, was really heartbreaking. So yeah, I think that maybe was the most eye-opening thing, and that just made me want to kind of dive in even more.
Yeah. I have one more question, then we'll open it up for questions. But It seems to me to be like a weirdly maybe risky thing to make a movie about this. There are a lot of people who work in the movie industry who probably might see themselves reflected in some part of this, or feel targeted even in some ways. So how do you navigate that?
I mean, it's really tricky, and it's going to make some people uncomfortable, and we just have to acknowledge that's part of making it. I mean, so it is. It's just always going to be difficult, and we always kind of knew that. I know we get two different kind of responses out of people to when we screened at Sundance or at Telluride with all industry. It was very like you either get people that are very uncomfortable by it and don't want to look you in the eye, or you get people that come up to you and grab you and go, oh my God, that was me. That's so we've kind of had both reactions, which is great. And not just with people in the industry, to be honest. Like, I had a woman that worked at a yacht company who said that was me. And I was like, wow, a yacht company, crazy. But yeah.
Great. Well, we have a mic, so if there are questions, raise your hand. Yes, we have one here.
Hi. She has no allies in the film, and in the assistant world, there would be allies, other young women too. Why did you choose to make her so siloed?
Yeah, a lot of people were speaking to me about feeling alone in that world, and often they said that they kind of put their friends and family second and put like their job first. And especially if you come in and there's like two men above in the position above you, I think few people like expressed that to me, so I think that came from that. But also we were like looking at the culture of silence and the idea of not communicating with your colleagues about what you're seeing, and how that can further kind of make these situations worse, in that that lack of communication is what allows this kind of behavior to keep going. So yeah, that was kind of the main thing. But also, I mean, yeah, I like when I was an assistant in Australia, I would call my mother all the time, and people said, oh, why doesn't she have friends? And I was like, oh man, I was just so uncool that's like who I went to. And Julia agreed that that's who we generally call our parents, but other people kind of reach out to friends or whatever they had. So I think it's just a unique, every situation's different. But I did hear that again and again about feeling very isolated in those positions.
And she's been there 5 weeks too.
Yeah, she's new.
I thought it was really interesting that there really were no names said in the movie. I was just curious what led to that decision.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It was like we stopped. Never wanted to name the boss because I felt like that would be too obviously trying to be something that it wasn't, or it would pull you out. And so in that sense, I kind of stripped his name out, and then in doing that, I kind of stripped everyone's names out in essence. So I don't think a single name is said almost, or yeah, really rarely. So and there was sort of an anonymity, like the idea that you can anyone can see themselves in her was sort of part of it. Like I wanted you to be able to relate to her if you're in a different position or whatever. So I didn't want to give her too much of a personality, but also Julia and I kind of worked on her character and who she was. So she was somebody, like we didn't want her to be lacking in humanity, but yeah, it's an odd line to walk, which we tried to do.
Hi, I wanted to ask about the sound design. At what point was that decision made? How much of it was ADR? How much was it during production? I just wanted to ask about the sound design.
Yeah, we worked with the best sound designer ever. His name is Leslie Schatz, and he did all of Gus Van Sant, like Elephant, the Gus Van Sant film, that are like really quiet films that are often layered with a lot of sound. And I knew that we didn't want much music, beginning and end, perhaps only, and that we would kind of layer in all these sort of background, like tension can be found in all of that kind of office machinery. So it became about the copiers and the fluorescent lights and all the buzzers and the sirens and the New York City scape. So Leslie sent out a bunch of sound recorders who recorded all this kind of stuff, and we kind of layered it in, and then we're able to it's kind of weirdly musical, like there is kind of a hums and buzzes that have a nice kind of musical quality to them that we kind of laid in to kind of get it feeling tense when it was feeling the energy was feeling low. But yeah, it was just it was something that we kind of knew going in that I didn't want it to be, I felt like cheating to montage it or put too much music into it. I wanted it to be very kind of authentic, and so that, yeah, it was something that we knew we'd have to do, and we ended up, doing that. A lot of ADR, a lot of people chatting about film stuff in booths that we then used in the background.
I was curious about the lighting. It seems dreary in the beginning, and then it just gets even more so in an environment that you would think would be very well lit as an office kind of space.
Yeah, I mean, it was... I don't know. We kept talking about the fluorescent lights, and that was kind of because that's what we associate with offices. Really, is that buzzing, humming, kind of dull fluorescent light quality. And then, I mean, I guess there's a lot of like Mindhunter. I think was what we often referenced in that it is very dark, but also it's moody, but it also is an office space. So, like, it's like how dark can we get it where it still feels like it's realistically an office and not just a horror movie or something. So that's the game you have to play. But also you've got these actors who need to be lit well, because otherwise, you got to make them look beautiful. So you kind of have to balance a bunch of things. But I work with the same cinematographer who I've worked with since we went to film school together, so forever. And we have a very kind of quick shorthand, and I frame and he lights is generally the way we work. So I wish he was here because he'd be better at explaining exactly what his references were. But yeah, it was lots of fluoros basically, or at least trying to achieve that effect, like this kind of claustrophobic, kind of tense office.
I'm actually an executive assistant for a creative agency, so watching this was pretty jarring because, like you said, it was me, and it was just very authentic, the regular day-to-day tasks that she was doing, and compiled with the intensity of what she was also going through. And I just wanted to ask, with your research and writing process, what was that like for you in getting this character to be as authentic as possible, based off your own experiences as well as the ones that you've heard through the Me Too movement and the research that you've done?
It's a bit of everything, because you interview people and you get stories and you kind of base it on stories, and then you kind of send whatever you've got around and try and get feedback on what you've got, and then you take so you end up with a bit of a script, but it's sort of almost Julia, who has no assistant experience but spent a bunch of time in her manager's office and different places kind of observing assistants, and she and I spoke to a bunch of assistants together about what their lives and sort of detailed things for her. And I think the two of us end up building kind of who she is and the detail of the day in a way that isn't in the script, because the script's pretty simple. It's just like she photocopies, or she, it's sort of task by task. But a lot of like the kind of characters, what she's about and who she is was something that Julia and I kind of figured out, and Julia brings to the table. So she's so good. It's partly, I think, as an actor, that you really get helped out by that process. So it is like different steps. It sort of changes as it moves, but it's a bit of everything, really.
Hi, thank you for such a beautiful film. It really was magnificent.
Thank you.
I work in HR, so I thought your representation of human resources was spectacular. I've also been a victim of sexual assault in the workplace, and HR, more often than not, is not on your side. So thank you for representing that perfectly. My question for you is, have you seen any changes within human resources in the film industry after the Me Too movement?
Yeah, wow. Honestly, I asked a lot of people about their experiences with HR, and that's where we began with that scene. And we kind of had a lot of stories about people coming to express their concerns and quickly realizing that the HR exists purely to protect the company and not to protect the employees. And so, and having everything kind of thrown on their face and thrown back in their face. And this idea that, like, I wanted it to be an example of gaslighting and an example of him kind of making her doubt her own position. So we were kind of playing with a few different themes going into it. But if it's getting better or not, I've no idea. I mean, there's a lot of people that are doing a lot of good things to try and make changes, and at least we're having conversations about it now, which I don't think we were doing before, which I think any kind of greater awareness helps shift things. We've also partnered with the New York Women's Foundation, and they have a number of like women-led organizations that are working to create like safer workspaces who talk about human resources in their initiatives. So that's, I think there are people out there doing things. Change happens, it's just slow, I think, unfortunately.
But the point where he had like the manipulation of, after yelling at her, being like, oh, well, you're so smart, I'm just hard on you because I know you're going to be great. That hit home in some ways, but I was wondering if that came through in was that part of the original script, or is that something you found in your research? And like, how many other points in the movie maybe kind of got dialed up from research versus like where you initially started?
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember that, I think that line, I'm going to make you great, the email reply was something that somebody read the script and said it's too much stick and not enough carrot, and you need like reasons for her to stay. So those kind of tiny moments of a little bit of optimism. It's, even though I don't think she fully believes them, and I don't think she's that ambitious anymore. Like she's sort of, her ambition's been kind of messed around, and I feel like she's a bit confused about what she wants, but still just having some positive force there in her life has helps her through the day a little bit. So I just added, there was a few things that were added in the script kind of phase as people kind of read it and had some ideas. So yeah.
Hi, I was curious about your decision to add the shot through the window at the end, after so much of the film had been like completely implied, and that one shot makes everything a little bit more explicit. I was wondering what the thought process was there.
Yeah, we debated that a lot. There was a lot of conversation about it, and I still don't 100% know where I stand on it. And I had a conversation with a few people last night at the screening who said to me, so there was one idea that she eats the muffin after she looks up at that window, or the idea that that's like the final nail in the coffin, or, you know, the point of no return, where she's almost like so dehumanized to that point that it doesn't register with her emotionally anymore seeing that thing. But I also just think after her almost knowing the whole day like what's going on, but she doesn't fully understand, the idea that it's visually confirmed in some way was important to us, so that it wasn't just always a mystery. So some kind of confirmation of that was what we were trying to achieve. And then, but we also didn't want to leave her we didn't want to drain her of her humanity so much that she just ignored it. So we kind of let her walk away as opposed to like finish the muffin or, you know, ignore it completely. But we find that audiences have told me that they kind of stare in, and then that they feel guilty that they're trying to look at it, and it kind of implicates them in this whole scenario, which actually makes it kind of interesting to me. So I kind of like that. So in the end, we kind of kept it and just kind of tweaked it. But yeah, I'll never know if it lands properly. I think it's okay. We'll see.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you
for
all
having
very
us. Thanks for
much
coming.
being
Thank you.
here.